Today we are visiting the Birkenau concentration camp, a prison that once held over 90,000 prisoners. It was also the place of death for countless others. Birkenau, or Auschwitz II as it's also known, was the largest part of the Auschwitz complex. It's here that visitors will witness first-hand evidence of some of the worst crimes committed in the history of humanity. According to the Auschwitz-Birkenau Memorial Museum, German Nazis began building Birkenau in 1941 on the site of a village named Brzezinka. Ultimately, Birkenau would become a hellish camp obliterating the meaning of humanity. Looking at Birkenau, visually speaking, you can feel a deep essence of evil, of decay, of tragedy even. But it didn't always look this way. There was once a village in place of this camp, but when the German Nazis realized that they had to expand their capacity for murder, the village was seized, homes were demolished, and slave laborers were forced to erect the buildings that we know today to be so definitive of genocide. Many people don't realize, but this type of camp was a widespread phenomenon amongst Germans. More than 40 subcamps exploiting prisoners as slaves were founded, mainly at various sorts of German industrial plants and farms between 1942 and 1944. The Germans created these camps as a replicable concept, furthering their interest at others' greatest expense.
The village had been expelled a few months before during the creation of kind of a farming entity around Auschwitz, which later became the zone of interest, 40 square kilometers territory that the camp administered. So local population had been expelled from there already, and they decided to build the camp from zero at the fields of the village. And the prisoners, also Soviet soldiers, started demolishing houses that had been previously expelled from local population, and this became the building material for Birkenau, which on paper in these early stages had even up to 200,000 prisoners in the future. That was the plan, which was never completed. Birkenau never had such a number of prisoners, but we can see the plans for expansion. The camp starts operation with the first brick barracks, later wooden barracks were added. The camp is growing with many different sectors, and very quickly those plans of creating a camp only for Soviet prisoners of war were cancelled. These transports stopped. So in Birkenau, many different groups of prisoners were held. And this is also where, from spring of 1942, the extermination process, the extermination infrastructure for murdering the Jews during the final solution were slowly developed.
The Germans isolated the camps and subcamps with electrified barbed wire fence. All contact with the outside world was forbidden. The area administered and patrolled by the SS went well beyond the grounds enclosed by barbed wire. It included an additional area of approximately 40 square kilometers surrounding both Auschwitz and Birkenau.
Usually, Jews were concentrated in some kind of assembly points, whether it will be ghettos or transit camps or some empty spaces, and then trains took them to the east to work, because the SS created the project of extermination mainly for Western and Southern European Jews, and they gave them the story of deportation to the east, that they would be sent somewhere to work, they would be relocated, and they would start their new lives here. So in a certain way, we can say that the main tool, the main weapon used during the extermination process was hope. Jews were given hope. They were told how much luggage they should pack. They were told about how many days will be the travel, so they had to also take the food with them, and so on and so on. And the journey could be anything between 1 day and 9 days, but sometimes longer, and they went into the unknown.
Trains carrying the prisoners that were deported from ghettos would pass through this gate. They'd then be unloaded at a 750-meter long ramp, and this is where the famous selection took place. Those fit for work might live for some time yet in the camp, but those who were elderly or weak went directly to gas chambers where they met their demise.
Selection in the camp starts regularly from July 1942 because the camp made a decision that they will use some of these Jews who are sent here for extermination as slave laborers, as prisoners in the concentration camp system. So from this moment, they sorted the fittest and the youngest to become prisoners, and then everyone else who were not able to work. So older people, children, pregnant women, people with disabilities, and they were murdered in a gas chamber. And this is the policy of the extermination, which means that only Jews who were deported for extermination went through the selection process. Other non-Jewish people who were sent to the concentration camp were automatically registered. They didn't go through the selection process. And then during the selection, the doctors made a decision, and statistically speaking, we can say that 75–80% of Jews who arrived here were murdered immediately in gas chambers after 1, 2, 3 hours. And 20–25% of those youngest and fittest Jewish people became prisoners of the camp. We have to remember, most of the Jewish people who arrived here never became prisoners. They arrived here, they went through the selection process, and they were immediately murdered without almost any trace.
The gas chamber and crematorium operated from June 1943 to November 1944. Chambers 2 and 3 were underground rooms that appeared to be showers. They were entered through dressing rooms. Then, unsuspecting men, women, and children were heinously murdered. When Zyklon B was dumped through ceiling access points, these chambers were fitted with a ventilation system that would air out the chamber so that corpses could be removed and cremated.
This was painful death, according to some Sonderkommando testimonies. Sonderkommando were prisoners who were forced to work inside the gas chambers and the crematorium, mainly Jewish prisoners. People were conscious for about 10 minutes, and then they were dying quietly. But there was a huge scream and a lot of pain in this at the beginning of the process of extermination. Then everything went quiet. The Sonderkommando also tells us that whenever there was some possibility of movement inside the gas chamber, sometimes the gas chamber was fully packed and people couldn't move at all. But when there was some possibility of movement, people climbed higher because the gas hydrogen cyanide poisoned the space from the bottom. And people driven by self-preservation instincts simply tried to save their lives, so they mounted corpses. And then the Sonderkommando, so those prisoners had to clean the gas chamber, inspect everybody inside and outside for any valuables, including gold thief, jewelry. Sometimes people hid some valuable items inside their bodies, and it was all checked. Then the hair was cut because the camp sold the hair to textile factories outside, and then the corpses were burned, and the ash was mainly dropped into rivers nearby.
When Germans began mass execution of Jews in Auschwitz in 1942, the remains of the murdered were buried in mass graves around the edges of the camp. However, in July 1942, an order was issued to exhume the corpses and burn them.
When we talk about the number of murdered people, approximately 1 million Jews, around 75,000 Poles, 21,000 Sinti and Roma, 14,000 Soviet soldiers, and approximately 50% of all the others. That is given according to our historical research.
Although death was the typical fate in Birkenau, those who were selected for work would be stripped of their civilian clothing, assigned a tattooed number. Beyond that, life here was no life at all. Birkenau offers a unique perspective of the capability of human beings at their absolute worst. I believe it is an experience worth having, but it is an experience that will change you forever. So until you come here and learn about this history yourself, I'm Ryan Sokash for Bullind Inn.